Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition here on Point of View. And yesterday I was out speaking to our good friends there in Birmingham, Alabama. I was at a very well done event, by the way, by the Biblical Marriage Institute in Birmingham. And we had a chance to hear from Penna Dexter and Debbie Georgatos. Debbie is still with us here today. Chelsey has joined us as well, Chief of Staff for First Liberty. And I might also mention, some of you, if you're having trouble with the internet, there's a reason for that. There was a cyber attack, and that's affected such issues as Twitter and Spotify and SoundCloud and Vox Media and a few others, and that was a cyber attack. So hope that everybody's internet's back up and running, but that is something we might get into a little bit later. So again, wow. Debbie, you've spent a little bit of time yesterday talking about the debate, but I think I'll quiz you a little bit more, because you had some thoughts to say, but a couple other issues that have kind of surfaced over the last 24 hours, haven't they?
I don't know which issues you want to hit, but anything about the debate, I'm just very, very excited to talk about. I really am. I thought that Mrs. Clinton's comments on the Heller decision were just remarkably deceptive.
Inaccurate is a nice way to say it, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Ill-informed is a nice way to say it.
But she's a lawyer. She knows better.
Yeah,
she knows
probably,
what was, I think, on that one.
Yeah.
There were just so many. It was rich, and I think one of the good things about the debate, you actually heard substantive differences, not just between the two, but conservative versus liberal outlook on really important issues. One
of the articles we've posted here is abortion in the third debate, so that you could see some of that. And that was a very well-written article that you can see. We'll get into the issue of Donna Brazil and the debate question and passing that. The establishment in panic right now, because Donald Trump is saying, well, I'm just not so sure I'm going to tell you on the front end I'll accept the reactions, the debate, the election and some of the things. And the debate, that was kind of a big issue. And yet I think his best answer could have been, why are you asking me this question? My opponent has said I'm unacceptable. The current president says I'm unacceptable. And if I'm elected, I get the sense that they wouldn't accept my election. So why are you asking me that question, really, is what he should have said.
You know, I actually I happened that night to do our local Dallas Channel 8 coverage of the debate, and that was the first thing that the Democrat on the panel said was, "Oh, he's going to be in so much trouble. That was a terrible answer." And I defended his answer then, and I will now. I think that given the amount of discussion there's been in the media about voter fraud, whether it is the New York State a Democrat election commissioner who acknowledged, and it went to a hidden microphone in Project Veritas, oh yeah, we cheat all the time. We load cars up with people and drive them around and vote over and over. Whether it's Project Veritas uncovering the comments by very high level black money operatives for the Democrats talking about how they cheat. The idea that Donald Trump should have to say before he even sees the outcome and what maybe caused the outcome to say, oh, sure, whatever happens is fine. It's like he's being asked to salute to their fraud. And he may want to reserve the right to say, I'm going to challenge, just like Al Gore did.
You know, we've talked about the dead people voting. Oh, they're in Colorado, and just silly me, but I've always had the philosophy, no representation without respiration. I mean, if you just...
That's very good.
So
I'm going to use that.
You're going to use that. By the way, your show is this Saturday. You have a lot to talk, or this Sunday, I should say. You've got a lot to talk about this Sunday, don't you?
I sure do. My show is America Can We Talk, and you can listen to it online at americacanwetalk.org, Sunday, 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. Thank you for letting me say that.
And by the way, hopefully the internet's not down, because that's how I lots of times hear it, on my smartphone or something like that. Chelsey, you're with us, and of course, First Liberty has a lot to talk about every week, but the one that I thought we would get to is one of those cases that was resolved very quickly. And when we've had Kelly in here, or any of your colleagues in here, there are two things we always say. Number one, You can't make this stuff up. And then number two, I find ourselves lots of times saying, boy, that was quick. I mean, I heard about this, what was it, on Tuesday, and it was resolved by Wednesday. Well, we're going to talk about it anyway. So tell us a story.
That's absolutely right. You know, we find it's a great thing to have a really quick victory, and a school district like Louisville ISD in the area do the right thing. It's very commendable what they did the minute that we drew their attention to this issue. They did the right thing, which is why we had such a quick turnaround on it. But essentially, First Choice Marine signed up to sponsor the school's bass fishing club. The West Jones is...
Again, you got to love the South. Bass Fishing Club.
Bass Fishing Club, that's right. And
well, I was just in Alabama. Right. They got it in Alabama, too. But go ahead.
Yes. West Jones is the owner, and his daughter is on the bass fishing team. And so he decided to pay the sponsorship fee, sponsor his daughter's club. And essentially, because the logo that is on his First Choice Marine business cards, it says it's not about us, it's all about Jesus. Because it had religious content, the school administrators stepped in and actually censored that content and said, not only can we not associate with your slogan because it's religious, but we're going without your permission to edit your logo and put our own version of it up, a censored version of it up, which is obviously, you know, a massive free exercise violation of the Constitution.
Sure. So the good news is that you sent a demand letter and it turned around pretty quickly. And so this is, I think, a lesson to recognize that sometimes we need to teach our kids. I go back to the Kuntz cheerleaders and some of these valedictorians and others that you've represented. Instead of saying, oh, okay, I guess we'll just have to do it that way, they stayed up, wait a minute. And after you sent out a letter, what happened?
Well, very quickly we heard from Louisville ISD, and they said these are supposed to be student-sponsored clubs. That we should have a neutral policy, and so they immediately said that we will not further interfere with the ability of this company to sponsor this club, which is wonderful, and it's an example of a school doing the right thing. It's very commendable what they did. You know, a lot of times we get into these situations, and we'll send the letter because we're trying to give them the chance to do the right thing. And a lot of times school districts will dig in their heels out of fear of establishment clause violations. And a lot of times they go swing the opposite way and say, absolutely no prayer in school or no valedictorians are allowed to pray. Or in the case of Coach Kennedy, we'll fire you if you continue to pray after football games. So in this case, Louisville ISD really cared about what the law had to say and cared about neutrality that's required towards religious speech.
Great outcome. I just love hearing that. I always comment about these. It may sound a little bit naive, but I do think like this particular case sounded like the school they just didn't know any better. They weren't necessarily trying to step up and attack religion. They're just trying to protect themselves. And they have the sense, given what they read in the media, that the safest course is just to silence religion. So once they know that that's not the safest course, it's actually the illegal course, they're really happy to turn around.
Yes. Well, and again, this is something we've tried to explain, Chelsey, to our listeners. You might have a young person in middle school or high school that maybe was told that he or she could not do something. And this is why just getting some of the material that's available at First Liberty, because you talk about the rights of students and even faculty and teachers and others at the public schools are some great resources. And again, if they click on your picture, it'll take them to First Liberty and then go through the resource section and find all sorts of things. And we lose our liberty because we don't stand up for it, right?
That's absolutely right. We like to educate the public, not just the school administrators and the ISD. Like in this scenario, we like to educate students and teachers and parents that you do have rights and you don't have to silence them just because they might be unpopular or because a school doesn't necessarily understand. I think it's so important for everyone to educate themselves. So that can all be found at firstliberty.org, as you mentioned.
Let me just mention as we go to a break that both of those websites you're going to want to go to, americacanwetalk.org, and you can actually see some pictures of Debbie and also hear any of the broadcasts, even previous ones, and I hope you'll be listening Sunday. I always do because I learn a lot, and certainly a great opportunity for you to learn from both of these individuals around the table. But when we come back, let's get back into the debate because there's a few things that have surfaced. Yesterday, of course, I think Debbie and Penna did a good job of kind of giving you a snapshot. But now this issue of abortion, this issue of accepting the election results, and a couple of other issues are kind of looming larger. So we're going to talk about those right after these messages. This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson. 20 years ago, no nation on earth endorsed legal same-sex marriage. Now same-sex marriage is everywhere. How did this happen? This is what Dr. Al Mohler attempts to answer in his new book, Why We Cannot Be Silent. He was on my radio program to talk about his book. He explains that this didn't start with same-sex marriage. First, we had the sexual revolution. Initially, some of the legal and cultural battles were over issues like birth control and contraception. America began to redefine marriage first by changing laws concerning divorce, and later with the acceptance of cohabitation and sex outside of marriage. There was also a homosexual rights strategy. Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen proposed a way in their book, After the Ball, to normalize homosexuality and marginalize Christians. They took advantage of the AIDS crisis to establish homosexuals as a victimized minority deserving a special protection and care. Albert Mohler explains how their strategy changed homosexuality from a vice to a virtue. He also talks about the impossible possibility of same-sex marriage. Homosexual activists were able to shift public opinion in their attempt to redefine marriage in a relatively short period of time. The emerging generation sees this redefinition as necessary because homosexuality is portrayed as the next civil rights battle. Albert Mohler also talks about the transgender revolution. Most Americans are not even certain how to talk about it, especially in this postmodern world. He concludes with chapters setting forth the biblical perspectives on sex, marriage, and family, and he raises important questions about the homosexual movement and what that will mean for religious liberty and the right to be a Christian. Our religious freedoms are in the balance in large part because of the sexual revolution and the redefinition of marriage. That is why we cannot be silent. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm Not Ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, weekend edition, and David Georgatos with us is Chelsey Youman. And again, we're going to get into some of the issues related to the debate and also maybe get into some other topics that are relevant. But I thought the one issue that surfaced a little bit, at least among some of the sort of, if you might call the social issues people, has been the issue of abortion. And I saw Gary Bauer do a video just the other day in which he was really kind of making the case that you've never seen a more stark difference. We've illustrated this even in our October issue of Outlook, in which I might hold this up for people that haven't seen it. If you haven't had it received, we went through the different Democratic and Republican platforms. But the other night, Debbie, don't you feel like we have a sense in which Donald Trump has said, I believe in the sanctity of human life. My vice president is completely pro-life, wanted to defund Planned Parenthood. For sure, one of the first people to ever do that. On the other side, you have Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, who have a 100% voting record with Planned Parenthood, want to continue and even increase the support of Planned Parenthood. And if I take what I heard Hillary Clinton say, believes that even in the 9th month, abortion should be legal, and there are no constitutional rights that a child inside the womb would have even after the point of viability, which I think goes beyond Roe versus Wade. But you're a lawyer, so help me out with this.
It definitely goes beyond Roe versus Wade. And I just want to say I'm so glad, Kerby, the way you said it. I think that debate really did help some people understand the great difference between, it's just not these two people, not just Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but the Republican versus Democrat platform in terms of the right to life and protecting the right to life and when that starts. And I thought it was really helpful to have the discussion focus on late-term abortion, because I think it's harder to convince a broad mass of people that in the first term, Roe versus Wade actually the decision itself talked about breaking down the trimesters and therefore the state's interest or right to regulate abortion based on how viable the unborn child is. But this was a really good, surprising topic, I thought, for a presidential debate, was to talk about late term or partial birth, which are not the same thing. But Hillary Clinton, in either case, whether it's the late term or partial birth, was really just right there with the idea that this unborn child has no right. She's right with the mother. And she tried this tactic I've heard many people on the left use, and they use it also when they're talking about the prayer in school. They use this tactic of saying, you don't know the women I've talked to, and you don't understand the pain they've been through and the difficulty, and this is not a light decision. She tries to make it a personal, you don't understand how they feel argument, and she's never, is that euphemistic whole approach. It doesn't deal with the fact this is as you say, a viable baby who, with respect to partial birth, is on the way out the birth canal when they essentially rip the child apart. And, she doesn't want to deal with the reality of that. So she talks about it in very sympathetic terms where she's trying to draw you in to sympathy to the mother. And in the same way that I mentioned public prayer, there's always, you don't know how bad kids feel if they have to listen to prayer that is inconsistent with what they learned at home. It's just that trying to drive you in emotionally instead of dealing with the reality of the situation.
Sure. Chelsey, you've got some thoughts on this as well as a lawyer, don't you?
I absolutely do. She definitely is advocating for massive expansion of Roe versus Wade. In Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court acknowledged that the unborn still do have rights. In fact, the longer the pregnancy goes on, the more that they should acknowledge the baby's rights over the mother's, in fact. So her stance is, I think, extreme, and not just extreme by evangelical standards or the right standards. She has a very extreme stance for the left. I truly think, and we've seen in the last few years, a turning of the tide when it comes to pro-life issues. Sure. I think that the left is losing on the pro-choice front. And so the fact that not only is she staking her territory on this issue, that she does it in such an extreme way, I honestly think it's her pull to the women voters. We know that 52% of women say the issue of abortion is very important to their vote compared to just 38% of men. And so I think that she's using this as a ploy. She's using it as a tactic to continue to gain female voters. But if evangelicals are having a hard time coming up with a reason to get to the polls this fall, and I have to acknowledge that evangelicals are really wrestling with this decision.
This is more clear than anything I've seen.
Yes, right. If the Supreme Court nominations aren't enough, federal court nominations aren't enough, if policy on other issues is not enough, abortion rights is more clear than ever a reason for evangelicals to get to the poll this fall.
Yeah, I don't know the polling numbers, but I do know that I've seen many polls that talk about people have shifting support for abortion based on how far along the mom is, how old the child is. And this idea of, even if you leave evangelicals entirely out of it, just human nature, moms and women, the idea that Hillary thinks this is what appeals to women is to say, I'm right with you until the day that, and Donald Trump actually said, until the day the child otherwise be born. And she was just fine with that. I think that is a harshness, a coldness that is just, it's antithetical to women and to the love of babies and children. It's just inconsistent with how women really think. But she is being forced into that leftist position because that is where the left is taking her. The leftist organizations that support her want her to say 100%. They worry about that slippery slope.
Yeah,
no exceptions.
Well, let me put that on the table, because if I were the counselor or the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, that will never happen, obviously, but if I were thinking along her lines, the moment she stepped into this, and we have these state regulations that are prohibiting women from getting there, I'm thinking, that was a mistake, because most Americans, they kind of all along the spectrum. You've got some that are, pro-life and no exceptions all the way to, abortion up to the very moment the baby's born. But most people find themselves in the middle, and they say, these so-called exceptions, where various states have like a 24-hour waiting period or informed consent, they seem reasonable. And when she started taking those on, I was thinking, you are now putting yourself further to the left than Barack Obama, further to the left than your own husband. that probably does not win with people that, if they have some ambivalence about abortion, say, wow, you're much more extreme than I thought you were going to be.
The word I thought listening to her was heartless. It's just a heartless, I don't care about this unborn child. She was quoted not too long ago saying that unborn children have no constitutional rights. And it's just this idea that you can see it's why women get so excited when you go in and have your, I can't think of the name of it, when the imaging, what's it called? Sonogram thing.
Ultrasound.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. Look at the baby kicking his, women know that, and men get excited about going and watching their wife do that. So this kind of, up until, I'm so pro-abortion, I'm so pro-women that she thinks it's pro-women, that just a utter heartlessness, I think that really turned people off.
And I do want to point out that I think this tends to be a lower issue on the voting scale for what voters identify as a reason to vote. However, I think a lot of that might be discouragement that Roe versus Wade is decided. We've had how many conservatives elected to the court that are supposed to overturn it that didn't follow through. But make no mistake that the next president, if it is Trump and we have his list of Supreme Court justices he will appoint, we could see Roe versus Wade completely overturned in the next 4 years.
That surprised me too. Chris Wallace, who I have very high respect for, I think he was the best of the moderators. But again, there were things I would do differently of moderating, but I'll give him credit for where credit is due. He pressed Donald Trump on that. Well, does that mean you want to overturn Roe versus Wade? And he gave the good answer, and that is, well, if we have 2 or 3 more pro-life justices, that will actually happen. If he wanted to, if he'd known anything about history, he could have said, if we hadn't borked Robert Bork might have actually overturned it back in the 1980s. You get enough pro-life judges on the Supreme Court or even on the federal courts, you're going to remand it back to the states. Likewise, if Hillary Clinton is the next president, then you get a lot more pro-choice individuals, and the possibility simply evaporates.
You know what else I would have loved if Donald Trump could have said? What he really needs to say on these issues is, I want justices who feel compelled to limit their opinions to what's actually prescribed by the Constitution.
Sure.
He could just say, forget labeling these justices as pro-life if they're constitutionalists, because there was no basis, and there still is today, no basis in the Constitution for Roe versus Wade, for the finding that there exists a right to abort your unborn child based on what the Constitution says. Just pro-constitutionalist, but he kind of got around that because he said, well, it's going to go back to the states, which is the answer once the Supreme Court says it's not a constitutional right. So I'd love to see it overturned just because the Constitution, it was unjustified as a decision to start with.
Yeah. We got to take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some of the phone calls. And again, my argument against Roe versus Wade is really even the argument that Justice Ginsburg made many years ago, and that is it was just bad law. Even though she liked the outcome, and even though she still serves on the Supreme Court, she and others admit that it was a terrible decision. And if you just follow the Constitution, some of the things the Supreme Court has done over these years would simply be overturned because, again, if you have to have some kind of originalist viewpoint or strict constructionist viewpoint, we will come to that. And, of course, we'll give you a chance to join the conversation. I know many of you would like to join that conversation, so let's open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. Going to get into a couple of other things that came out of the debate, but if you would like to read a little bit more of this article that appeared in National Review, Abortion in the Third Debate, kind of really sets forth the case. Might be something you might want to read. You might want to hit that share button and pass it on to some others that are kind of thinking about their vote as well. Let's take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
From PureFlix comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
Based on her personal journals, I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13, now playing. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are few things more important. Many ministries say 2016 has been tough, very tough. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not. But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net, click the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151 or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos as well as Chelsey Youman. Again, these are individuals that have been with us so many times around the round table, but we want to include you as well. At the moment, talking about some of the comments made in the third and final presidential debate on the issue of abortion. We'll get back to a few of these other issues as well. Some of the moral charges against Donald Trump, the questions about whether or not he would accept the election results and much more. But since at the moment abortion's the topic, and that's what all the phone calls want to address, let's take some of your calls. Eddie in Texas, KBJS. Eddie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for taking my call. One question I got is Hillary seems to want to say that the government shouldn't have no say in it, but then she wants to turn around and use our tax dollars to fund all this and give abortions. And like on the abortions on demand, I had a question like just how many of these women that have abortions are repeated abortions where they don't take into consideration of any human life or any kind of responsibility of themselves. And
yeah. And we've done some of that before. Off the top of my head, I forget, but it is amazing that there is a high percentage of individuals that have more than one abortion in their life. So that's an issue. But you raised a bigger issue, and that is in the Democratic platform this time. The 2016 Democratic platform on abortion is very different than the 2012. The 2012 kept the old phrase that comes from the Clinton administrations. Bill Clinton, he wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. They took that out this time and instead talked about abortion as a woman's right, number one, but number two, wanted to overturn the Hyde Amendment. Now, that's named for a man by the name of Henry Hyde, who is a member of Congress from Illinois, and it prevents your tax dollars from being used to fund abortion. Now, that statement seems to suggest, let me go around the round table, Debbie and Chelsey, that Hillary Clinton and her administration, if they can do so, would want to use our tax dollars, even through Obamacare, to pay for abortion. What about that?
I think they absolutely would. And I think kind of politically what it reflects is I think the Democrats think they have won the argument with the American public. And I say that because back at the time of the Hyde Amendment, I think the reason for it was a recognition that a broad swath of Americans, and probably the majority, did not agree on the morality of abortion. And so the reason that you wouldn't use tax dollars, it was forcing people to pay tax dollars for something they truly find immoral. And so it was an accurate reflection of America. And if you are willing to get rid of the Hyde Amendment, you're kind of saying either we've won the argument and the majority are with us, or we really don't care what the American people think. We're going to do what we want to do. And either way, it's a terrible reflection on the Democrat Party.
Chelsey, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life. And so you just gave us some numbers just a minute ago. I still think there are a lot of Americans that say, even if abortion is legal, I don't want my tax dollars going for that.
You're absolutely right. It's a matter of conscience protection in our country. And for about 10 to 15 years following Roe versus Wade, courts and legislatures at the state level and the federal level spent years carving out exceptions from having to be forced to participate in abortions. And that includes everything from pharmaceutical companies having to provide abortifacient drugs to doctors and nurses being allowed conscience protections. And that's a matter of religious liberty. So expecting the American public as a whole to pay and fund abortions who are adamantly against this in their conscience is a really extreme position. But we know one that's being tested out of Washington. The Stormans case is a case that the pharmaceutical company did not want to provide abortifacient drugs, did not have a history of that, and would refer elsewhere. However, they were sued and ultimately lost and lost their company almost because they were being forced to provide abortifacient drugs soundly against their religious beliefs. So this is another area of religious liberty that I don't think gets enough spotlight, but to definitely be aware of.
You can, again, type in Storman's case. I did a commentary on that. And, of course, you also have some things on First Liberty on that as well, if people want to read, because that's an incredible story where they're simply saying, look, there are, I think, over 30 different drugstores within a couple of miles radius where people could get those abortifacients. So why force one drugstore that's Christian-owned to say that you and the pharmacist here have to prescribe something that you disagree with? That shows you how, again, there's almost a targeting of people that are pro-life.
Yes, and the ordinance that was passed specifically did target religious entities who wanted to object to abortions. And so that's where you'll see Christians or the pro-life factions of America definitely being targeted by these laws.
Wow.
On the subject of religious liberty, we were talking, I guess, on a break about how I think even today, sometimes you'll say to people, well, there are religious liberty issues, or we're concerned about the Supreme Court going forward. Depends who gets these slots in the Supreme Court, how much religious liberty be protected. People are more persuaded to understand that religious liberty is a serious question when it's a case like this, the Stormans. It's a couple. It's a family that owns a pharmacy, just like the Sweet Cakes Bakery in Oregon. It's just these entities around America that are they're mom and pop, or they're a family owned, a small business. They're not trying to force their views on anyone else, but they're being told, no, the society is going to force our views on you. And I think that really resonates with people as an actual affront to religious liberty.
You know, it's interesting that oftentimes when the left is not in power, then they talk about, well, let's live and let live. Give us those rights, But then as soon as they're in power, that live and let live goes away, doesn't it? And we've kind of figured that out. And that's exactly what we've seen with the targeting of bakers and florists and photographers and innkeepers and all sorts of things. So this is a preview of coming attractions, we think. But let's take another question, because this one gets a good question for you lawyers to answer here about the Constitution. Susan, KCTA in Texas, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, good afternoon. I've been wanting to ask this for a while but couldn't get in. I was thinking Hillary wants to appoint pro-choice judges, and Donald Trump said he wants to appoint pro-life judges. But I thought the purpose of judges being appointed for a lifetime was that they weren't influenced by their personal political ideology, and they just interpreted the Constitution. So I thought it's not any better for Hillary to do it than it is for Mr. Trump to do that. So then I thought, well, where did Roe v. Wade come from? What part of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights? Actually, the right to life is not in either of those. I thought it was in the Declaration.
Sure.
It is.
Well, and again, let's talk about that, because really you had a previous case out of Connecticut having to do with contraception and this idea of the right to privacy. But Susan's looking through her Constitution. By the way, we still give out pocket Constitutions. She can't find the word abortion in the Constitution. Help us out here, Debbie.
Well, Susan, first, I love it. You're a great thinker. I appreciate your question. The Griswold versus Connecticut case was where the Supreme Court found this unspoken right to privacy, and that had to do with contraception. And, it sounds so odd now to think that a state actually was outlawing contraception, but that was the case at the time. And the problem with this finding of the right to privacy is it is undefined, and it gets expanded. So in the case of Roe versus Wade, and I'm sure Chelsey can give a more detailed analysis, but Roe versus Wade, a lot of what the court was finding was this right to privacy, and they use the expression the penumbral, the combination of many rights all boiled together means this, and it really was just legislating from the Supreme Court. I mean, that's how I viewed it. It was not, and I could not agree more with your point about rather than either of these candidates saying, I want a pro-choice judge or pro-life judge, they should be saying pro-Constitution. Just like Antonin Scalia, who was a great justice, he deeply disapproved of flag burning, but he upheld the right he upheld a case that, yes, it's a First Amendment, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You can burn a flag as your statement against America. That's what you need. You need someone who supports the ideas of the Constitution above their own personal views.
That's right.
Right. I think where the ideological differences come in would be a strict constitutionalist would be less likely to find new fundamental rights out of thin air than someone who believes that the Constitution is living and breathing document, which is what I think they're trying to say. But you're absolutely right. I think that where the right to an abortion came from is they call it fundamental rights. They're not explicitly stated like freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom of the press, which are explicitly stated in the Constitution. They kind of expanded. There are all these other rights that the Constitution implies. They're implied rights. And that's where we got the right to an abortion, but also, incidentally, the right to same-sex marriage was ruled as a fundamental right and not a protected class, which I like to point out. There's a difference there.
And Debbie used one of those words that you want to learn for your SAT, penumbra. And for those of us that love astronomy, penumbra actually is a shadow that you get when you have like a lunar eclipse. And so they actually used a science term to say, well, it's kind of the shadowy part of the Constitution. So can I point to any place in the Constitution where it says you have the right to privacy? No, but it's part of the penumbra, which is just silly. And that's a good example of why even people that believe that abortion should be legal, if they're honest, admit that 1973 Roe versus Wade was a terribly argued decision. And if you ever want to read it, it was written by Harry Blackman. It skips over all sorts of very important judicial information and the rest. And yet that gave us abortion on demand. And it's something that might be in jeopardy if you get some pro-life justices. Let's take a break. We'll take some more calls right after this.
An important book landed at number 1 this summer on the nonfiction New York Times bestseller list. It's currently number 3. Its title is Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a culture and family in crisis. This book is important right now because it helps us understand the lives of a people, a whole culture in Appalachia, whose circumstances and problems weigh heavily in this election cycle. The author, J.D. Vance, is 31 years old. He was born and grew up in southwestern Ohio's Rust Belt. His roots are in a place he calls the Holler in Jackson, Kentucky. He escaped the life that prevails there because he had a tough grandmother, Mama, who made him study and created a few boundaries. He joined the Marine Corps, he went to college, and then to Yale Law School. Now he's a principal at a leading Silicon Valley investment firm. Throughout Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance sprinkles commentary and facts about the working-class white population in Appalachia and the Rust Belt of America. He points out in his introduction that, quote, as surveys have found, working-class whites are the most pessimistic group in America. He continues, as the manufacturing center of the industrial Midwest is hollowed out, the white working class has lost both its economic security and the stable home and family life that comes with it. Many of these folks eschew any kind of welfare, though, he says, a large minority was content to live off the dole. The people in Appalachia talk a lot about hard work, but there's really not enough of it. At least not the kind they feel capable of. Many young men, though employed, are way underemployed. J.D. Vance writes of 20-hour work weeks and also of the prevalence of alcohol and drug addiction, including that of his own mother. He also writes of homes like his, where there is a, quote, revolving door of father figures. He describes the fighting and yelling, even physical violence, that is common in many households. All of this contributes to a vicious cycle of instability. Young people growing up here have trouble finding the motivation to seek a better life. They claim religion, but J.D. Vance writes, oddly enough, we think we attend church more than we actually do. He says churches provide a great support for the faithful when they face difficulties. But, he writes, in a part of the country slammed by the decline of manufacturing, joblessness, addiction, and broken homes, church attendance has fallen off. The story of J.D.'s journey through this is a good read, and I recommend it if you can stomach some salty language. The hillbillies J.D. Vance writes about are patriotic. They love America. They used to be Democrats. During the Reagan years, most voted Republican. They and people like them in other parts of the country are heavily impacting the presidential race. J.D. Vance's book helps us understand them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, still talking about the subject of abortion. We'll get into some other topics in the second hour, but let's go back to the phones. And in this case, we're going to talk to Shirley, KBJS in Texas. Shirley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. I wanted to ask you a question or, make a comment about, if somebody kills a pregnant woman, whether it's intentional or whether it's murder, they are charged with a double homicide or a double manslaughter. So how can they do this to unborn babies and not call it a crime?
And that's shows you the illogic, and I'm going to come to Chelsey on that because we were talking about how these are illogical arguments, because up until Roe versus Wade, we recognized that a child inside the womb did have certain rights. Even think about rights to inheritance. If my wife were pregnant with another child, we have 3 kids, but let's say she's pregnant with a 4th, if it came time, if I died to divide the vast assets of the Anderson estate, of which are small, you divide it among 4 children and not 3. And we also, as we have recognized here, considered a double homicide, a double murder, of those kinds of things. But after Roe versus Wade, if a woman says, no, I don't want to keep the child, that's not considered a homicide. But if she does decide to keep the child and somebody harms her, either accidentally, a doctor, a car accident, or intentionally, like a murder, we recognize that that is justifiable criminal action. So this illogic just is hard to put together, isn't it, Chelsey?
That's right. And we see that the left is fraught with these kind of logical errors on their side for policy. But she has a commercial right now running, Hillary Clinton does, saying she's pro-child and she spent her career dedicated to children. Well, I guess she's presuming the children only outside the womb because she's drawn a line of viability for a child and what's worthy of having dignity and protection and what's not.
Yeah, and I said this earlier, but I think it's so interesting with the way that the left can have so many inconsistent positions. It is the use of euphemisms. Maybe that's not the right word, but they talk about the entire discussion of the debate when Hillary Clinton spoke about abortion. It's always about the woman, the mom, the tender situation she finds herself in, challenging situation, blah blah blah. It is like you're not talking about the issue of what is the morality involved in killing an unborn child. You have to go off of this kind of painted a scenario, this woman in a troubled situation. It's like she ignores half of the equation. But that's okay because has been the entire discussion on the left is we're only going to talk about the mom. We just can't acknowledge the reality of this child.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for the right. Republicans have a duty to address women, I think, a little bit more than they do, because I think that the truth is what's unspoken on this debate stage is that the left's policies for women are not better for women. Depression rates are higher for women who've had abortions. A lot of them need to seek counseling. There's trauma that comes from this. It's not a medically regulated field. And so not only is there mental and emotional trauma that can come from these instances, but there's also a lot of times someone's life at stake in these scenarios. And that is not loving towards women. And that is not pro-woman.
It's also just the whole societal conversation. There is no way, especially in these late-term abortion situations, there is no way someone faced with the reality of a viable unborn child and a mother who's decided, I think I don't want a child after all. If you had the ethics discussed as a national political conversation, you're not going to come out on the side of, well, since the mom really is now divorcing the dad, or whatever the problem is, she can go ahead and kill her baby. They can't deal with the reality of this unborn child, of being a person as a child. So they have to just focus on one side of it. And I think it is why they do that, because if you have the conversation in the entire context, you wouldn't come out being pro late-term abortion. You couldn't come out there.
I was just thinking, you went to SMU Law School, right? And we did a debate a while back. That was before you were at law school. But on this issue, one of the professors there at the SMU Law School was Jewish, and they brought up Exodus 21, where it says if 2 men are fighting and a pregnant woman is harmed, that is, the baby inside the womb is harmed, that you have what is called the lex talionis, a life for a life, burn for burn, wound for wound. In other words, we were making the case even to a person who did not accept the New Testament. Of course, you have all sorts of verses, I think, in the Old and New Testament that show that there's life inside the womb and God's care extends inside the womb. But just if you look at the Old Testament law code, it was based on the fact that if a child inside the womb had the same legal standing in the Old Testament as a child outside the womb. And that's how our law was actually constructed. And so you can go back to the English common law, which it used to be you had to read when you went to law school, Blackstone's commentaries. When I went to Georgetown, you did, because you went to Georgetown, and I went to Georgetown in political science, and you learned the kind of moral basis of the law, and that made sense. But what Chelsey's pointing out is once we have this decision, Roe versus Wade, we say a baby inside the womb is a human being and has rights, unless the mom wants to kill it. Or unless there is some kind of accident that takes place. And so, again, we need to come back to some kind of legal sanity, don't we?
legal sanity and consistency. And I do think, I love, Chelsey, you made the point that I think that the conservative side needs to do a better job talking to women and about women. I think we have, unfortunately, and I'm a conservative, and so I feel like the left has been able quite successfully to paint the conservatives as intolerant or not caring about women, that if you don't accept Hillary's point of view about there's a tough decision, it should belong to the woman, that you're anti-woman. And we need to have a better response to that. Say, no, we're in support of all life, women and the babies. We want to support all of them. We want to discuss all of it as these aren't just a woman's issue. It's a societal discussion to have, a societal policy. What are we as a civilization?
And I think, to me, the best answer that we have are these pregnancy resource centers around the country. There are more crisis pregnancy resource centers than there are abortion clinics. Mm-hmm. And if you go to the abortion clinic, they just want cash, and they just want to tell you that abortion's the only answer. You go to a pregnancy resource center, they're saying, look, we'll stand with you. We'll see, if you don't want to keep the child, we can put it up for adoption. If you don't want to keep the child, we want to. And so in some respects, that has been the pro-life answer to women who are convinced that the only answer to their crisis pregnancy is abortion.
Right. And I think the rampant issues that we're seeing are actually a result. We've got to tie it in with the same party that brings you the sexual revolution, that says, we can have free sex without any repercussions to society. Well, there are more children now being born. I think it's 60% now of children are being born to single parent homes.
That's true.
Which means that their poverty rate increases by 6 times in their lifetime. So there are very real repercussions that come from something that has now been painted as being so pro-woman, to say that there might be other alternatives out there. And it's up to the conservatives to provide those alternatives and say what is really loving to women and families during these times.
One quick thing I was thinking when you're both talking is one of the arguments the left makes is, and I don't recall it was being said this most recent debate, but has other times, why don't you trust the woman? I mean, that was kind of the Hillary mantra, trust the woman. Well, if a woman, as you were saying a moment ago, she had a baby and decided, oh my gosh, it turned out baby has blue eyes, I hate blue eyes, or whatever, decided that for any reason that you were going to end that baby's life, you don't say, well, you get to decide that because you're the woman. We trust the woman. We say, no, we respect the baby's life and your life, and you can't take it. And there isn't any difference if the baby is 8 months along and still inside the mom. I mean, just this trust the woman thing is again, it's a misleading argument that distracts you from focusing on the fact that you're dealing with a life.
Well, again, if I've ever done moot court or any debates or things like that, I would never want to draw the ticket that said I have to argue pro-choice, because all you have to do is talk about emotions, because all the arguments, the medical arguments, the legal arguments, the philosophical arguments, not to mention the biblical arguments, pretty much all on the side of pro-life. That's one of those debates where it's real simple. We need to take a break, though, and I see a few of you would like to still stay on that topic, so we'll cover that again in the second hour, and then also talk a little bit more about some other things we learned from the debate, and look forward to how this campaign is going to go in the next couple of months. All of it available at the website, pointofview.net. We certainly do encourage you also to click on that button that says donate, and we'll be back right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, and it is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you just joined us, been talking a little bit about the debate that took place Wednesday, the third and final presidential debate, and got into the subject of abortion. A lot of our callers want to address that issue, and we saw a very clear difference between the two of them. But then we'll get back into what some people have called the circus of the election, although it turns out that Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey have actually complained. It says the circus wants its circus back. It said, stop calling this election a circus. We're the circus. So you could not make that one up, but I just had to bring that up. Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey launching its own campaign to take back the circus. You know, that it has been a circus, and we'll spend some time talking about that. Have a few calls left over from the previous hour. Debbie and Chelsey with us. So let's go to, let's see, we're going to go to Roscoe in Georgia. WGPH. Roscoe, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking my call. I just had a quick point I needed to make real quick about the abortion issue, and it was this: people that argue that abortion is right base it on the fact that the unborn child cannot feel pain, and that's why. And they say that abortion is okay because of that. And my thing is this. Okay, say we take a person who suffered an injury, a brain injury or something of the sort, and they feel no pain or, you know, something to that effect. Is this person any less alive than they were when they felt pain?
Good argument. You know, or people that have leprosy don't feel pain. And first of all, let's deal with this. Chelsey, you and I have talked about this. Matter of fact, I have this in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, about the fact that we do have pretty good evidence that indeed the unborn do feel pain, and that's actually the basis for some laws, isn't it, Chelsey?
Absolutely. At 20 weeks, they found that 20 weeks of gestation, they are fully capable of experiencing pain. But I even think younger than that. There was a study done where they put a camera inside the woman while she was having abortion, and they called it the silent scream, where the baby physically reacted to the medical procedure being done and the abortion being done. And so even though 20 weeks is where they think that the babies can feel pain, I mean, it could even be as early as 8 weeks.
So again, one of the things they have in one of the British medical journals was, I love this, try sticking an infant with a pin, and you know what happens. She opens her mouth to cry and also pulls away. Try sticking an 8-week-old human fetus in the palm of his hand, opens his mouth, pulls his hand away. And, of course, they've been able to measure now some of the issues of pain. So, Roscoe, you're right on target. And, again, it just illustrates the inconsistency we have in this abortion debate. So thanks for calling today.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Well, let's, if we can, get into a few other issues that are on the topic, and there are quite a number of you that would like to address this issue. So we'll go out to Nebraska this time. KCMI. Gary, thank you for calling.
I was listening to your comment a few minutes ago of several other reasons to go against, besides even just what the Bible says. That's good. And the comments of Mrs. Linton about...
Well, I was hoping this was going to work. I knew that wasn't going to be a good line, but I think what you wanted to ask is the problems with the term pro-choice. And at least I hope so, because I obviously can't hear what he's saying, but I think that was the issue. And that's the struggle I always have, because you have to use terms that communicate. But when you talk about people being pro-choice, really they're pro-abortion, aren't they? So what about this?
I actually have noticed, I'm glad this gentleman, Gary, I'm glad you raised that point. I think the pro-life people just kind of got the greatest label of all. And on the other side, pro-choice just sounds like you're respecting the women, but actually all of the studies that talk about how you're treated when you go into abortion clinics, even including Planned Parenthood, there is advocacy for abortion. That is, the outcome is, or just the assumption is just fine. Don't worry about it. There is never any on the abortion clinics discussion. Well, here are some options. Here you might consider this. So even they say it's pro-choice, it's really just the assumption. This is the right answer. No worries, no side effects. Go for it. Yeah. So it's really an advocacy position in favor of abortion.
Absolutely. And I also thinking of the women that are typically in these situations, I do not doubt that this is a really significant moment in the women's lives. It's a very hard decision to make. It's a very scary one. A lot of times the studies have shown it's made out of desperation and fear. And so I think it's up to the church in America and conservatives alike, but the church to come alongside and say, what are the root causes of this evil in our society, and what can we do to help come alongside and alleviate those issues for women, and really try to decrease it from the root cause.
The other thing Gary brings up is something that's just bugged me since the very beginning, and that is the way journalists cover this. And if you look at the AP style manual, you are not allowed to be consistent, which is ridiculous, because either it's pro-life and it's pro-choice, or it's pro-abortion, it's anti-abortion. But we know the way the game is played, and that is individuals that are pro-life are always called anti-abortion or against abortion rights, and the individuals that are for abortion rights are always called pro-choice. And that just strikes me as terribly unfair. So just from a journalistic point of view, I, again, appeal to some of our secular journalists and even the people that write the style manual for the individuals that are writing these stories. Can't we at least be fair? And of course, given the fact that more than 90% of the people working in journalism today believe in a woman's so-called right to abortion, you just don't get a fair discussion about abortion, which is why, if nothing else, I hope you'll listen to Point of View.
One other similar point is how often people in politics will say, I'm liberal or I vote Democrat because of women's issues. And if you press them, I wrote about this in my book, if you press them, they really just are talking about abortion, and they have equated being pro-woman with being pro-legal abortion or pro-abortion, and that is completely false comparison. Those terms are not similar. Many women ardently believe in the right to life and are pro-life, and so you're not pro-woman to be pro-abortion, but that the left has kind of captured that, and the media goes along with that.
Let me just mention your website again, America Can We Talk. They can get your book still, can't they? Women Can We Talk? You'll sell it to them?
It's called Ladies Can We Talk, it's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually got a bunch of new Amazon orders recently, so it's good. It's 4 years old now.
Yeah, Ladies Can We Talk, and that's where you really talk about some of the women's issues, and that used to be the title of your radio program, but now it's America Can We Talk.
And we let the guys listen.
Yeah, because I always used to be a member of Eagle Forum and Concerned Women for America, and I always felt like that I was never really allowed. And I always listened to you, Ladies Can We Talk or Women Can We Talk, and I go, well, I'm a guy, but I just value your input. So now it's America Can We Talk, so that's good. Chelsey, your thoughts?
Well, I think there's just a lot of dynamics to this issue. It's not a simple issue, but I do think it's one that's worth continuing to advocate for. I think it should be at the top of our list for voting this year, and I think that it's something that conservatives can do a better job reaching out about and addressing the underlying issues here.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we have a full bank of phone calls, so we'll just keep working our way through that today. And as we get closer to the election, I'm going to probably spend more and more time giving you a chance to express your opinion, because certainly we are thinking about a lot of these very important issues, so we'll certainly encourage you to take the time to find out a little bit more about some of these issues and to visit our website, pointofview.net. Let me also mention that next week we're going to have in studio with us, for example, Jim Dennison. Avi Lipcomb is going to be here. We'll talk about Israel. We'll get into a number of other issues along the way. So even though we will try to give you as much opportunity as possible to look at some of these issues, we'll also have a chance to hear some really outstanding guests. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
20 years ago, no nation on earth endorsed legal same-sex marriage. Now same-sex marriage is everywhere. How did this happen? This is what Dr. Al Mohler attempts to answer in his new book, Why We Cannot Be Silent. He was on my radio program to talk about his book. He explains that this didn't start with same-sex marriage. First, we had the sexual revolution. Initially, some of the legal and cultural battles were over issues like birth control and contraception. America began to redefine marriage first by changing laws concerning divorce, and later with the acceptance of cohabitation and sex outside of marriage. There was also a homosexual rights strategy. Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen proposed a way in their book, After the Ball, to normalize homosexuality and marginalize Christians. They took advantage of the AIDS crisis to establish homosexuals as a victimized minority deserving a special protection and care. Albert Mohler explains how their strategy changed homosexuality from a vice to a virtue. He also talks about the impossible possibility of same-sex marriage. Homosexual activists were able to shift public opinion in their attempt to redefine marriage in a relatively short period of time. The emerging generation sees this redefinition as necessary because homosexuality is portrayed as the next civil rights battle. Albert Mohler also talks about the transgender revolution. Most Americans are not even certain how to talk about it, especially in this postmodern world. He concludes with chapters setting forth the biblical perspectives on sex, marriage, and family, and he raises important questions about the homosexual movement and what that will mean for religious liberty and the right to be a Christian. Our religious freedoms are in the balance in large part because of the sexual revolution and the redefinition of marriage. That is why we cannot be silent. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm Not Ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, a full bank of phone calls, but as a caller drops off, you might be able to join us. Debbie and Chelsey with us today. Let's go to California this time, KYCC. James, thank you for calling us today here on Point of View.
Hello, thank you for taking my call.
Any thoughts? Yeah,
my question is, what makes a woman, and here's what I mean. A female gets pregnant and can make a decision to keep or abort the baby, but is still not able to vote.
Interesting. You know, and it gets back to something else that Hillary Clinton was upset about. We have these laws that have what's called informed consent and parental notification. And if a 16-year-old or even younger is pregnant and is allowed to go and get an abortion without even the parents being notified, forget about parental approval, just parental notification, that's an issue. And she's allowed to make a decision, a life and death decision, before we even give them the right to vote at the age of 18. What about this?
Absolutely. You know, the informed consent thing is especially troubling. We were talking, I think it was on the break, but talking about that idea. You know, you have a child who's the school or other organization assists this minor in getting an abortion. Parents don't know a thing about it, but the parents are going to have the consequence afterwards. It may be physical consequence if there is some problem in the abortion or some after effects, some outcome, but also the emotional trauma and the idea that this child's going to go, just like you maybe took them off to get their arm set when it was broken, that's different. But the abortion is treated too lightly by the left as something that, assumption there'd be no consequence. But the family ends up, who had no idea, no notification, may still not ever hear about it, except with an informed consent law, that you're going to end up with parents dealing with a long-term consequence.
Yes, I think that's something, if you guys remember the Texas law HB2 from passed a few years ago by our state legislature that tried to address some of these issues because they found studies that showed in the rural areas These young women would drive maybe 4 hours to the city, get their abortifacient drugs, go home and take the drugs, and then there would be medical complications that arose, and they're 2 hours from the nearest hospital. And that's deeply troubling in a field that, as I mentioned, is largely unregulated medically, because of the pro-choice movement. And so the HB2 bill tried to put some parameters around this and really provide some protections to women. And ultimately the Supreme Court turned it down this summer. But yeah, it's something that states really should be considering, how to protect these young women and girls who might not even be really educated on what all these processes are.
For sure. Let's go back, and we're talking about the third debate, and I think Michael in Maine, WSEW, would like to talk about that. So, Michael, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Kerby, and guests for taking my call. Let's see, a few things on the lighter side I'd like to point out. First of all, I think Trump was the only one that wore an American flag pin other than the mural that was on the wall. And secondly, I noticed that we watched it, by the way, we streamed it. And we watched it on the computer, and I noticed that Hillary kind of stood still for a lot of the time, kept her left arm elevated, which is an old blood pressure trick. Doesn't help your blood pressure much, but anyways, I wonder if taking blood thinners had anything to do with her arm being elevated that way. The other thing, too, I noticed the words on the back wall behind Hillary's head basically said rights of the people, but the way her head kind of blocked some of the words, it read, rig the people. I thought that was humorous.
I had not noticed that. Let me take your middle point, though, because that brings us up to something we'd love to talk about, because Edward Klein has been on the program, and he's going to be on your program this Sunday, correct?
Yes, he is.
And here's the piece that I think some people are familiar with. We've posted it before, Guarding Hillary's Health. This appeared in the Washington Times, and it goes into, as you mentioned, Michael, quite a bit, and that is ever since she has had some of these issues, and these are all sorts of things that we can go into and have been before in terms of suffering from arrhythmia, an abnormal heartbeat, a leaky heart valve, and of course also having then taken Coumadin, which is a blood thinner that causes some of these fainting spells that we've seen, and also the possibility of a concussion or more that she's had. So when you talked about holding her left arm up there, trying to regulate her blood pressure, that's, again, one of those health issues that I think the American people need to know a little bit more about. This has always been a problem. We've really screened Americans from the health issues of Woodrow Wilson and John F. Kennedy, and we can go through the long list, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and others. But go ahead, Michael.
And just a few more things, and I'll hang up and listen quickly. In a way, Hillary kind of complimented Trump by saying that Trump got a $14 million loan from his father, because if I had $14 million to give to Trump and I saw what he could do with it, that was a compliment, in my opinion, when Hillary had said that. And the other thing I want to say is you had Chuck Swindoll on a few weeks ago. He talked about the FedEx logo, the arrow pointing up. Yeah. Well, Fred Smith Jr. himself inherited, I believe, approximately $3 million, and look at the company he started. So just because, there's money floating around. And one humorous thing I thought Chris Wallace said during all the arguing between the two of them, he said, "Hey, listen, I'm not a potted plant." Did you catch that?
I did. Matter of fact, there's some other talked about as well. I was waiting for him at some point to say, "If you guys don't get along, I'm going to turn this car around right now," something like that, because it was the case. This is the health issue that I guess if people would again want to hear "America, Can We Talk?" you're going to have a chance to talk with Ed Klein, and he is really, through his research and interviews, and then add to it some things we learned from WikiLeaks, we've learned a lot more about the health issues that have been affecting Hillary Clinton. And I think that's something to evaluate. If for no other reason, then it should cause every listener to pay attention to who your vice presidential nominees might be. I'm not so sure Donald Trump's going to make it, but I really have some questions about Hillary Clinton, and so that's why you need to pay attention to who Mike Pence and Tim Kaine are, don't you?
Absolutely. And on the subject of Hillary's health, a related issue is that the media, so much of mainstream media, and I don't know if you want me to list them, but, the Washington Post, New York Times, NBC, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, they are all in the tank for Hillary and have been for months. And so every time any health issue is raised, the coverage is immediately about how it is exaggeration. She had a minor problem. She just had pneumonia, and that the Republicans are being mean or conservatives are being mean to even point it out. And this is a disservice to the American people to have an advocacy media that is simply not going to present facts to the American public, allow them to have any discussion on air. We had to hear endless discussion of Mr. Trump's most unfortunate, salacious remarks from 12 years ago. But you had more coverage in the last whatever number of weeks since that's come out than you ever got in some of the serious questions about Hillary's health. And honestly, the media is truly disservice to the American people.
Well, again, some of the topics that we wanted to put on the table and give you a chance to hear the conversation as well. Let's go out to California again. KYCC. Don, thanks for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thank you. One of the weaknesses that we have in the abolitionist movement is that when most of us spend time in the Point of View college course from day to day for that hour and a half, we need to take the wisdom that we get from the class and we need to take it to the streets. And I notice a lot of times that while we have all these great arguments and debates about all these answers to the answer of abortion, every week I go onto a college campus here in California, and my team challenges the students that are there in the quad.
And I know you do that, yes.
Yeah, and I wish we could get more men and women who have good, solid answers to the abortion issue to come out and join us in the marketplace of ideas, because that's where we need to take the things that we learn, like from your Point of View class that you offer us every day. We need to take that to the people. We're too busy. Too often we're preaching to the choir. And the pregnancy health centers, great program, awesome program. But I've only run into one pregnancy health center so far. I'm sure there's some others, but only one, the one at UNLV there in Las Vegas, where they actually take their mobile unit onto the college campus.
Well, we need to do more of that. And I used to go on the campus a lot more, but this radio show kind of keeps me here every day. But even being in Birmingham, I'm thinking, I could go to University of Alabama, I could go to Auburn. Of course, there's University of Alabama and Birmingham. I mean, you do recognize how important those issues are. And you can certainly take the Point of View class, which we conduct 2 hours every day. Or you can even just get like Randy Alcorn's book, Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Abortion Arguments or Rhetoric, and all sorts of other resources, Stand to Reason, all the rest. And take what you have and use it. And Don, I know you do that. I've had a chance to meet you, and I would just want to encourage people to do that. May your tribe increase. We need more on the campus and more in the streets making these pro-life arguments. We've got a break. We'll come back and take some more phone calls. That's coming up right after this.
From Pure Flakes comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
Based on her personal journals, I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13, now playing. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are few things more important. Many ministries say 2016 has been tough, very tough. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not. But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net, click the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie and Chelsey with us. Let's go to Florida. Randy listening online. Randy, thanks for calling in.
Sure. I see much conflict and division in the church over voting for Trump. And so much of what I hear from those who support him seems to be moral relativism and situational ethics, and leading to their own understanding instead of thus saith the Lord, and acknowledging God in all our ways, including voting. I have a question. In the book, In His Steps, the author says in every situation and circumstance we should ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? And so I would ask you, what do you think Jesus would do when it comes to a voting for Trump or not? And secondly, in Exodus 18:21, God instructed Israel to choose rulers that fear God, love truth, and hate covetousness. And you'll never convince me that Trump measures up to any one of those three divine standards. So I'd like to hear you weigh in on that in the previous question.
Well, and again, you've got some really good points there, and it's, again, one of those situations where if an individual believes that it would go against their conscience, I think Romans 14 speaks to that issue. Of course, Romans 14 had to do with meat sacrificed to idols, but for whatever you might think, there are certainly some ideas that you have to recognize that might violate your conscience. But here's how I've been, over the last week or so, trying to help people think through this, and that is to look at the 4 Ps. The first P that you're talking about is the people. What kind of character? And I'd have to say that right now, whether you look at Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, neither of these people are of great moral character. I mean, I think that's just a given. Now, there may be some people who call in and disagree, and you're welcome to do that, but I think you've already helped us understand that particular issue. So I want to go on to a couple of other Ps, and one of those relates to the president, and that is the personnel. Because even if you don't like the person at the head of the ticket, you have to recognize you're really voting for the entire cabinet that is going to be part of that. And the example I've used before is, do we ever once in a while have a sports team where we don't like the coach? A couple of weeks ago, I had Jeremy Dyson here, and I said, have you ever had a sports team you don't like the owner? Jeremy said, oh, the Cowboys? Yeah, okay, we've had a few of those examples. But you have to recognize that the people that are going to be making a lot of the decisions about the future of America are the personnel. Kelly Shackelford so often here says personnel is policy. The first choice that was made by Donald Trump is Mike Pence, an individual that I do believe is of good character, is pro-life, does believe in marriage, and of course we can talk about other people he might put in his cabinet. The person that Hillary Clinton picked was Tim Kaine, an individual that was the head of the Democratic National Committee, 100% abortion voting record. It's pretty obvious that that's really different. When you talk about who they're going to put on the Supreme Court, I mean, it's as different as night and day. 11 different names that Donald Trump has given to us, and Kelly and I pretty much agree that at least 9 out of those 11 are really good, and the other 2 are pretty good. In fact, I'm beginning, now that I've learned a little bit more about those other 2, saying I think they're a lot better than even we've given them credit for, and certainly superior to anything that you're going to get from Hillary Clinton. So that gets you to the last 2 Ps, your policy and your platform. Do we see a difference between the Republican platform and the Democratic platform? I think you see a real striking difference on every issue. In just a minute, we want to talk about Citizens United. On the First Amendment issues and Hobby Lobby, we see differences. On the Second Amendment issues, we see striking differences. On the issue we just talked about, abortion, partial birth abortion passed 5-4. Does anybody think that pro-abortion Hillary Clinton appointees are going to uphold that in the future? No. Do you think that the kind of individuals that Donald Trump would put on the Supreme Court would? Yes. So again, if you work your way through people and personnel and policies and platform, I think you have a very clear choice. If you at the end of that day say, I cannot bring myself to vote for either of those candidates, okay, you still have all sorts of other people you need to vote for, because 44 of the states where we broadcast actually have state elections. 14 of you have governor's elections. And so there are all sorts of people. Plus, there's 34 U.S. Senate races, 435 races for the House of Representatives. So the bottom line is, I can't, Debbie, see where anybody who is a born-again Christian says, I'm going to stay home, even if they don't vote for top of the ticket, and I think they should. And yet 25 million, almost 26 million born-again Christians did not vote in the last presidential election.
I agree with every word you just said. I think it's a very, very thoughtful analysis. And, our caller, I'm sorry, Gary. No, I'm sorry.
Randy,
excuse me, Randy. I really do... I can relate to your concern about looking at biblical standards and then thinking, how can any Christian think that Donald Trump lives up to those? But part of the answer, in addition to everything that Kerby Anderson just said, is that you do have to look, what is the other choice? What is the outcome if I don't support Donald Trump? Because I think if there were a very centrist, milquetoast, inconsequential candidate on the Democrat side who was pretty, kind of halfway on abortion, wasn't a big pro-abortion advocate, someone who might respect religious liberty, you might say, well, Donald Trump is just, he's too morally flawed. This other person isn't so bad. So I'm just going to stay home. But I think you have to be, you're in charge of whether at the end of the day, because on November 9th, it's either going to be President-elect Hillary Clinton or President-elect Donald Trump. There's no other person who's going to have that title on November 9th, the day after Election Day. So to my sense, what Hillary Clinton will do to this country in terms of abortion rights, in terms of abortion advocacy and spreading it, in terms of the Second Amendment, in terms of holding up the Constitution, what she represents is such a radical and kind of a Obama on steroids left-wing turn of this country away from freedom, away from our freedom-based society. There's where she takes us is that I think I have to swallow. Donald Trump wasn't my choice in the primary, and I think in the primary is a time to do the analysis you were talking about. But here we are in the general, and that's the only choices we have that are the outcome. So, to my sense, preventing the evil Hillary will cause to America is a good enough reason to vote for a man who doesn't meet the standards that you would like to have them meet, which we all would like to have them meet.
I completely agree with you that this is an uncomfortable, it's a messy question for Christians because there is not a clear answer. But the truth is, we have to choose between the two. And to say you're going to sit at home and to say that you're not going to vote for him or her essentially does lend the vote to Hillary Clinton. And it's uncomfortable. I think Eric Metaxas had an article come out that was very, very good on this issue a week or two ago. And he just said essentially it comes down to a question of who is your vote. If we're looking at a vote as a moral issue, who is it accountable to? Is it only accountable between you and God? Because if that's the case, then your conscience, prevents you from voting for Trump. That's one thing. But what about all of the people who will be impacted by your vote or your choice not to vote for our presidential candidate? Is your vote accountable to the world at large, even the international community, unborn children? And the other thing I would add to those two questions to kind of complicate it, but also be thinking through is, where would your moral complicity come in? Is your moral complicity going to be with the fact that you think voting for an individual says that you automatically sign up for their morality and all of their choices and what they're doing? Or does it come from choices they're going to make in the future? I don't know that, I think God's an understanding God, and that by making a vote, casting a vote for Trump, I don't know that you're necessarily saying, I agree with him wholeheartedly on his treatment of women. I don't know that it's that strong of an endorsement, but definitely think through who your vote will ultimately impact and who your vote's accountable to.
And that Metaxas article is Wall Street Journal. Sorry.
Wall Street Journal. Very good. And, of course, there's a couple of others that have come out here as well that certainly Jim Garlow's piece and some of the others. But the other part I want to just bring up is I mentioned Mike Pence in passing, but we all like Mike Pence. Sometimes I ask somebody if it were reversed, if Mike Pence were the presidential candidate, and somehow he had picked Donald Trump as his vice presidential nominee. Hard to believe. Okay, but let's play that game for just a minute. Would you still have those same reservations? And most people go, well, I don't know that much about him. Well, that's why I encourage you to find out more about him, because this is somebody around the table. We've known this man for decades. I've been with a think tank. He started with a think tank. He was a radio talk show host. I'm doing radio. He was doing television for a while. He then went into Congress. He's been a governor. He's got a record. And on most of these issues, he is certainly strict in terms of his views on the Constitution. You take the First Amendment, you take the Second Amendment, you take abortion, you take euthanasia, you take religious liberty, you go down the line. There's really no place where I can think that most Christians wouldn't say, I have complete trust in what? Mike Pence. who again is the VP. And some people say, yeah, but he won't have any influence. Oh, yeah? Donald Trump hasn't been around the block that long. It's pretty obvious he's not real into the details. I got a feeling that Mike Pence is going to be running that a lot more than almost any vice president other than maybe Dick Cheney. And so when you're voting for the package. You're not just voting for all the stupid things that Donald Trump has said. You're voting for some of these other really talented people who agree with us on the issues we talk about here at Point of View. When we come back, let's talk about those, because we have the Citizens Unite comments about First Amendment and Second Amendment. And Debbie, you've done some research. Before we go, I want you to do some analysis here, some fact checking. So we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
An important book landed at #1 this summer on the nonfiction New York Times bestseller list. It's currently #3. Its title is Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a culture and family in crisis. This book is important right now because it helps us understand the lives of a people, a whole culture in Appalachia, whose circumstances and problems weigh heavily in this election cycle. The author, J.D. Vance, is 31 years old. He was born and grew up in southwestern Ohio's Rust Belt. His roots are in a place he calls the Holler in Jackson, Kentucky. He escaped the life that prevails there because he had a tough grandmother, Mama, who made him study and created a few boundaries. He joined the Marine Corps, he went to college, and then to Yale Law School. Now he's a principal at a leading Silicon Valley investment firm. Throughout Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance sprinkles commentary and facts about the working-class white population in Appalachia and the Rust Belt of America. He points out in his introduction that, quote, as surveys have found, working-class whites are the most pessimistic group in America. He continues, as the manufacturing center of the industrial Midwest is hollowed out, the white working class has lost both its economic security and the stable home and family life that comes with it. Many of these folks eschew any kind of welfare, though, he says, a large minority was content to live off the dole. The people in Appalachia talk a lot about hard work, but there's really not enough of it. At least not the kind they feel capable of. Many young men, though employed, are way underemployed. J.D. Vance writes of 20-hour work weeks and also of the prevalence of alcohol and drug addiction, including that of his own mother. He also writes of homes like his, where there is a, quote, revolving door of father figures. He describes the fighting and yelling, even physical violence, that is common in many households. All of this contributes to a vicious cycle of instability. Young people growing up here have trouble finding the motivation to seek a better life. They claim religion, but J.D. Vance writes, oddly enough, we think we attend church more than we actually do. He says churches provide a great support for the faithful when they face difficulties. But, he writes, in a part of the country slammed by the decline of manufacturing, joblessness, addiction, and broken homes, church attendance has fallen off. The story of J.D.'s journey through this is a good read, and I recommend it if you can stomach some salty language. The hillbillies J.D. Vance writes about are patriotic. They love America. They used to be Democrats. During the Reagan years, most voted Republican. They and people like them in other parts of the country are heavily impacting the presidential race. J.D. Vance's book helps us understand them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, we have Debbie and Chelsey here. I thought we'd just pick up a few other things that came from the debate. You covered a little of this, I suspect, yesterday, Debbie, but it would be worth going into it again. Well, let's just look at First Amendment, Second Amendment. And part of this is I was again surprised when I looked at some of the things that Hillary Clinton said about the Citizens United case. Now, this is maybe a little bit inside baseball, but it isn't really, because it gets back to all the cases we talk about with Chelsey and Kelly and others, this issue of religious liberty. Your view about the First Amendment tells me a great deal about the kind of people you will put in the federal judiciary and the kind of people you put in the Supreme Court. And she's made it very clear that this decision the Supreme Court has made, she wants to overturn that as quickly as she can. Explain that, if you mind.
She does, and her position is so antithetical to what she would claim her party stands for, which is really supporting the people's right to speak and freedom of speech. Very quickly, in 2002, McCain-Feingold passed. It was campaign reform legislation. It was campaign finance reform legislation. And in 2010, the case was issued by the United States Supreme Court, which is called Citizens United. And in Citizens United, essentially the background facts, which are kind of funny, but there was a movie put out about Hillary.
Right.
It was called Hillary the Movie.
Right.
And the movie was essentially going to be about, how bad she is and who she really is, and she didn't like that. And so the federal government essentially took the role to forbid the distribution of the film on the grounds that it was critical of a public figure. I mean, it was under this campaign finance law language. And the bottom line of it all is Citizens United, why she hates it is because Citizens United said, no, actually, this is political speech. Whether it's by a corporation or an individual, it's political speech. And you can put it out and you can say what you think and others can condemn it. She basically, when she's saying she wants to repeal Citizens United, which is she says she wanted to put back in place limitations in time, especially on when political speech can occur, because she essentially was upset about the idea of her being criticized in a movie.
You couldn't have a Dinesh D'Souza Hillary's America movie, for example, and you could not have certain kinds of videos and ads and those kinds of things.
It's a very censoring idea, and that Hillary is backing, and she really is. It is very consistent with that notion of kind of an elite ruling class. What you have, honestly, in countries where you don't have freedom of speech, where the government can say, we're not going to have you critics of the government out there sharing this in the media.
It's also sort of an Incumbent Protection Act as well. So again, this is something where when she says Citizens United, that just goes right over the head of most people. But if you research it, you realize this is First Amendment stuff, isn't it? Right?
That's absolutely true. I mean, I never want to be an alarmist, but I do think this is very disconcerting in a trend where we are seeing religious speech, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press going under attack in our country. There's trends on university and campuses nationwide that ban hate speech and ban offensive language, and we're seeing public accommodation laws being passed by this party. The leftists are passing these laws, banning quote unquote, any speech that would make someone feel unwelcome. Well, I'm not really sure how you quantify that, but I do know that they are essentially willing to put government resources and executive enforcement power behind these activities that ban hate speech. And we, when Obergefell came out, we did an amicus brief studying other Anglo countries that have gone before us for same-sex marriage, and by now England and Australia and Canada all ban what they call hate speech, and they can define that however broadly they want. But I think this is in line with a growing trend on the left that's not really getting enough publicity out there, that the left really is saying, get on board or we'll silence you.
We will suppress you. I'm so glad you mentioned hate speech. That is one of the things that, I mean, to an observer who isn't tuned into the details, it does sound like, well, yeah, why should people say hateful things? Yeah, make it illegal. Hate speech, it's a bad thing. But as you say, and it's a perfect example, what if you are a Bible-believing Christian and you say marriage is between a man and a woman? That's what I believe it is. And the notion that, especially if you say it on air or publicly, could that be, or as part of public advocacy, that could be actual hate speech? And
I'll tell you, in Australia, if you were to say that, you could get up to 6 months in prison. And I am not kidding. I mean, and that's a trend that Australia had a similar constitution to ours in some regard, that we are beginning to see here.
Can we get to the Second Amendment? I know we only have a few minutes here, but I did want to get to the Heller case because, again, we saw some striking differences between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on the issue of gun control and Second Amendment, didn't we?
We sure did. And Heller, and it's so important all your listeners understand this, prior to the Heller decision, many people in the American left argued that the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution did not really mean didn't mean the words that it says. It did not really mean to guarantee the right of an individual citizen to keep and bear arms. That was the central question in Heller. I mean, the statute they were looking at had limitations on the right to own a firearm or keep it in your private possession. But the Heller decision was seminal because it basically said, yes, the Constitution means, the Second Amendment means you have the right as an individual to keep and bear arms. It settled the question. Hillary Clinton on the debate stage said it was about toddler safety, and it had to do with what if a toddler, which of course, again, evokes emotion. People think, well, gosh, of course you want to protect toddlers from dangerous guns in the home. It had nothing to do with that. But when Hillary says she wants to reverse Heller, She wants to reverse the Supreme Court's finding that the Second Amendment means you have a right to keep and bear arms as an individual. That's what she's saying.
Well, again, just some very important issues that surfaced in the debate, and if nothing else, wanted to give people a chance to think through some of the implications of this. We are less than 3 weeks away, just 2.5 weeks before this will be decided. So any final comments about how to evaluate this campaign over the next couple of weeks as it unfolds?
Well, I think it's easy to say as a voter and an educated voter, where to begin. But I think it's important to know what's at stake and to look at a big picture, that how many hundreds of federal judicial nominations the next president will get over the next 4 years. I can't overstate that issue enough, because Obama has had 8 years to pack the courts with liberal judges. The only way we reach an equilibrium is if a Republican is elected. I think 16 years total of those nominations could really change the makeup of our country for the rest of our lives. So that's a top issue to be thinking about. Obviously, we've talked a lot about, being pro-life today and what that means for our country in the next few years. And that doesn't even get into foreign policy. But I think start thinking through really what's at stake. There is a lot in this election.
You have to get past personality. I would just add that, there are a lot of people on the left who don't like Hillary, and a lot of people on the right who don't like Donald Trump. But I'll tell you, the left is going to vote for her anyway. They will hold their nose and do it. And so if people on the right say, well, I don't like Donald Trump's conduct or words he said in some tape 10 years ago or his lifestyle, you know what? I don't either. I don't know anyone who does. But you have to vote for the ideas that his party stands for, and that he'll be pressured. He'll be pressured as a president to give power to the ideas that the Republican Party stands for, and Hillary will be pushing the left-wing agenda.
Well, again, we will certainly continue this conversation next week. I recognize I have a full bank of phone calls, and again, we're going to leave a fair amount of time for your comments every single day. Matter of fact, next week on Monday, I have Carmen Labarge with us, and she has written on things I wish the candidates would have said in the presidential debates, and so I'll have her maybe just join us more as kind of a co-host. Jim Dennison will be with us. We're also going to be talking about Israel, because we wanted to bring Bobby Lipcomb here, and so we'll get into some of those issues. So if you didn't have a chance to express your opinion today, this is the Court of Public Opinion. We'll provide that for you next week, as we always do. And don't forget, just before we run out of time, we've got some great resources for you. First of all, you would like to find out a little bit more about the broadcast that will be taking place on Sunday. Go to AmericaCanWeTalk.org, and people can watch you and listen to it, can't they?
On Facebook, we stream live on Facebook at America Can We Talk. It's Sunday, 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. And online, AmericaCanWeTalk.org, you can listen live.
And again, First Liberty is a great place to find all those resources. So, Debbie and Chelsey, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great weekend. We will come back here on Monday, and I want to thank Andrew and Catherine for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back on this Monday. We've got a lot to cover next week. We'll see you then.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.